Welcome to the Insight Podcast. Joining me on the show today is Niamh Fitzpatrick. Niamh is a psychologist and author of Tell Me the Truth About Loss, a psychologist's personal story of loss, grief, and finding hope. I talked to Niamh about what we get wrong about grief, the tragedy her and her family went through and what it taught her about grief, insights and strategies that could help you through grief, the importance of human connection and community, how to support someone who is grieving, and much more. Enjoy the episode. What do we get wrong about grief?
Well, I suppose for balance, I have to say, I think there's a lot we get right about grief and there's a lot we're learning about grief. But I think if we can think of it in terms of what do we not know about grief until we're grieving, there's a lot in there. So, I think there's that sense sometimes of, this, what I call the still factor. You're still impacted by that loss. Somebody might say to somebody who has had a person they love died, and it might be 5 years ago, it might be 10 years ago, it might be 15 years ago, longer. And there can be a sense from that outside world of, that almost that head tilt, oh, you poor thing, you're still impacted by that. And of course you're still impacted by that. This is somebody you love and you're never going to see them again. So I think until we're impacted directly by grief, we can often get that wrong. And we can think that it's something that happens, somebody dies, you find your way through that space, and then off you go with your life. And it's almost like grieving, and then a point of not grieving. But that's not really how it is when you're in it. Another thing I think that we get wrong or are learning about grief really is what I call the and factor. Is that idea that you can be utterly heartbroken and you can learn to live your life again with that heartbreak in the middle of it. So it's not one or the other. There's a model of grief, the Tompkins model, Lois Tompkins model, and she talks about how we grow our life around the grief. So a great way to describe that or to portray that, if you like, is if I was to draw, in the air a circle, and in that circle is your life. And when somebody dies, somebody we love dies. And of course, grief, by the way, is not only about death, it's about loss. So when somebody in our life dies or we incur a loss in our life, if I got a pen and I drew lines over and back and over and back and over and back across that circle, lines that would touch every edge of that circle, those lines would represent the grief. They represent the grief we feel for the loss we feel of somebody that we love has died or a loss we've incurred in life. And so what we can see with the lines is that the grief touches every corner of our life. That's our life in that circle. And the lines are touching every edge of the circle. So that when we grieve, it impacts us always, physically, emotionally, psychologically, everything. But Tompkins' theory says that what we used to think was that circle with all the lines in it, with the grief, we used to think that would get smaller. So people would even say things, to that effect of time heals, and it gets better with time. You hear things like that. But Tonkin would say that actually we draw a wider circle around the initial circle to denote that what we do is we grow our life around our grief. We grow our life around our grief. So we hold the grief for the loss that we feel. And we find our way in time, across time, and with work, we find our way to being able to live our life alongside that. And I think we get that wrong, or we don't know that about grief until we're grieving. So it's that and piece. It's not either or. I think another thing about grief is that it's not just about sadness. grief is about, it's about rage, it's about anxiety, it's about guilt, it's about resentment, it's about loneliness, it's about overwhelm, it's about confusion. It's so many things. It's so many things. And I think part of that is that grief is not just emotional. We think of somebody grieving, if we were to say to most people, think of somebody grieving, what emoji would you use? And most people would use a crying emoji. But actually, grief is a whole person experience. So it impacts us physically, our sleep, our immune system, our energy levels, all sorts of things are impacted by it. I think what we get wrong, hugely wrong, two things really, I think, to finish on this piece that we get hugely wrong are things around the toll that secondary losses take. So things like, how your life changes when somebody you love has died. Again, the world can think, well, the person dies, you feel terribly sad, you might feel angry, maybe they allow you to feel that anger, but then you find your way to that, rejoining life, if you like. But what they don't realize is for a lot of people, their actual own life is different after the loss. So if you have somebody whose spouse dies, for example, well, they then come home maybe to a completely empty house. They have no one that they live with. They're everything from their food shop to, going on holidays to friend groups to everything in their own actual life can change. It's not just the loss of the person they love. Somebody who's maybe say, for instance, if it's a couple and they have a child, well, that person who's left behind can then become a single parent. So the change in your life after somebody dies, I think, is not talked about a lot and enough. And that I would see as a secondary loss. And also things like around the admin of grief. So, in some people's case, it's things like investigations and inquests. In other people's, it's probates and wills and selling houses and all of those kind of things. That takes immense toll on people. And I think we can lose ourselves in some of that loss. And I think the world doesn't really often realize that. So they'd be some of the things I would think we're maybe not so much getting wrong about grief, but perhaps not realizing about grief until we actually live it.
And those parts about the time frames, like you're talking about wills and dealing with some of the admin, it's almost like there's an expectation to, right, come on, like you've got to deal with this by this time and let's get this sorted. And it's like, whoa. And also, you started with that time, as in there's an expectation that, right, yes, you should be done with your grieving by this point. I'll comfort and support you by this up until then. But come on, it's been 6 months, it's been a year now since maybe you lost a loved one, or maybe a relationship broke down or something like that. Like, you should be over it. But of course, people handle loss in different ways, don't they? And there's no set time frame that is, right, I'm done grieving now, I can just move on and be fine.
Yeah, and there's so many factors that will influence our grief. So if you were to think of, the type of things, I saw a wonderful sort of drawing again of this by a psychotherapist here, Breathe Carroll in Ireland, does a lot of work around grief. And she had a blank page, and in the middle of the page, she had the person who's bereaved. And then there are all these spokes coming out of that sort of middle piece, almost like spokes on a wheel. And those spokes are the factors that will influence that person in the center, their experience of grief. So they will be things like the relationship to the person who died, how they died, where that person was in their life, what support systems the bereaved person has around them, what their own coping skills and mechanisms are, what their previous life's experiences have been, their styles, their different styles of handling things in life. So there's so many factors that will impact that piece around how we grieve and how grief impacts us. But I think that sense from the world, and there's no badness meant by it. You know, I notice there are sometimes the odd time somebody will make a comment to you online. It's usually online, and it's a really nasty, mean-minded, mean-spirited, just horrible thing. And I just literally, if I ever see those, I glance at them and off I go. I block and move on straight away. Don't engage or anything. But most people aren't like that. Most people will make comments. If they make any comment around sort of, you know, like, really? Like, you're still grieving, or it's still impacted by it? That's not meant badly. That's just somebody who just doesn't understand. You'll rarely will you find somebody who is grieving themselves make a comment like that. They just won't, because they get it. They get that grief moves and that it's waves. There's this lovely piece online that is so beautiful that actually some days I can read it. I could read it out, and some days I just couldn't, because it's so beautiful. I get that lump in my throat is so big that I just couldn't talk. And what it is somebody at one stage put into the Reddit boards, "My friend has died, I don't know what to do." And this person responded, and their name that they call themselves G Snow. I always remember that. And they said, "I'm an old man. I have no children, but I've lost people in my life. Let me tell you what I think." And he went on to describe how grief is like a shipwreck, and how the ship is wrecked in the water, and how you're hanging on to a piece of driftwood. And the waves at the start are 100 feet high. And they come towering over you, and they just wash you off that driftwood. And they come 10 seconds apart, and you're gasping for breath. You think you'll never survive this. And then he says that the waves become maybe 15 seconds apart or 30 seconds apart, and then further apart. And then instead of 100 feet high, they're 80 feet high and 50 feet high. And then eventually you can sort of predict maybe the waves sometimes. Now, I also add into that description the idea of the rogue waves. So these are waves that will catch you that aren't predictable. And they can happen at any time. And what he's describing there is how grief moves and it shifts and it changes. It's not that it gets better, but I think we get better at carrying the loss. I think when you're grieving, it's like somebody throws you a bag of rocks and says, "There you go, Sam. That's your bag of rocks. And you have to carry that bag of rocks. And they're yours and yours alone. So nobody else can carry that bag for you." And at the beginning, like with the waves, you fall down and you stumble because the weight of this is so huge. But in time, it's not that bag of rocks gets lighter, because the pain for the loss of the person who is gone is still there. But what happens is we become more able to carry them. We become more able to climb that mountain carrying that bag. And so I think that piece around grief moving and shifting and changing explains why, how can it be that somebody you love has died 30 years ago, but you are still impacted by this? Think of waves. That's a wave of grief has come in for that person again. And that's okay. They're not coping. They're not doing it wrong. They're not weak. They're nothing like that. They're just somebody who loves. And that person and that life they love is no longer.
Grief seems to be a bit like loneliness in that it affects a lot of people, but perhaps we're not talking enough about it. Do you think more people are affected by grief than we realise and are, suffering in silence, keeping it to themselves and not wanting to share, based on all this that we've just said as well?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's based on all of this, because I think what happens is there's certainly a feeling when you're bereaved, or I would say experience any loss in life. I've experienced life losses that are not bereavement loss as well as bereavement. And I can say it holds for that too. It feels to you, whether we're right or wrong in this or not, I don't know, but it feels to you as if the world says, all right, now you've got a window. You touched on it earlier, exactly that. You've got a window, and we're going to be here for the wake. We'll be here for the funeral. You know, as I describe, all the sandwiches have gone cold, you know, or stale, and people go back to their own lives as they have to, because we can only live one life in this life, and it's our own life. So people go back to their own lives, of course. And so there's a sense then of you have to then start that adjusting piece, getting used to living without the person you love. And it feels as if life gives you a window to do that and says, well, we will listen, we will be gentle with you when you go back to work, and we'll mark the first month, we'll mark the first anniversary, we'll do all of those things. But I don't know whether we're right or wrong in this, but I think it does feel as if there's a window in that. There's Worden's 4 tasks of mourning talks about that when we grieve, when we're bereaved, there's essentially 4 things we do. So the first one is we need to accept the reality of the loss. The second one was we need to process our feelings around the loss. The third one is we need to adapt to life without the person in it. And the fourth is we need to adjust, to invest in a new life whilst maintaining a connection with the person who died. Now, that's a lot of work. And that takes time. And it's not linear. And don't even get me started on the stages piece. It's not stages. Grief is not about stages. We know that. So, and that theory, by the way, was never meant to suggest that it was. But anyway, that's another day's story. So that work around the grief piece, that takes time. But I think we don't, as grievers, have that belief that the world will afford us the time to want to be able to hear that. We certainly perceive that window. And I think what happens then is, because we don't want to moan, we don't want to be bringing people down, we don't want to be having that head tilt of, oh, you know, you're still impacted. We don't want any of that. So what we can tend to do is we might share for a while in our own world, but also online. We might share for a while, but then there's that sense of, well, I'm just going to go quieter on this. And that, of course, can afford for a much lonelier space.
Now, you talk about grief from a very real personal experience, don't you? Maybe for the listeners, we can put this in a bit more context. Could you tell us about what you went through around 6 years ago, wasn't it? And how that has affected you, and how that led to you then writing your book on that's about grief.
So it's actually coming up to 7 years in about 3 weeks' time. So my sister is Captain Niamh Fitzpatrick, and she was a pilot, a Coast Guard pilot with the Irish Coast Guard Search and Rescue Unit. The helicopter was Rescue 116. And essentially for me and grief, how I became acquainted with was on Monday, the 13th of March, 2017, I went to bed and I had 4 siblings. And I was woken by a phone call the next morning just before 6 to say that the helicopter was down. Dara had a call out the night before. She lived just 4 houses away from me. And with my other sister, Emer, and with Dara's son, she had a little son who's 2.5, nearly 3 at the time she died. And I just got a phone call from Emer to say the heli's down, come over. And we discovered they had been sent out on a call out. In Ireland, there are 4 helicopter bases, search and rescue bases for the Coast Guard. And Dara was based on the East Coast in Dublin. And they got a call out to provide what's called top cover, or support, if you like, for their sister helicopter, Rescue 118, off the coast of Mayo, the west coast of Ireland. So they'd travel across the country. And at 12:46 a.m. on Tuesday, the 14th March, the helicopter, on its way to provide that top cover, crashed into a rock off the west coast of Ireland, off Mayo, a rock called Black Rock Island. on the coast of Blacksod. They were going in to refuel, and the helicopter ditched into the water, and all 4 crew were killed. And I see, even now when we talk about the waves of grief, I can feel this. Like, we've just spoken for a few minutes, absolutely fine, and I feel my voice, I feel my eyes, I feel it. And this is going to be 7 years in 3 weeks' time, on the 14th of March. And Dara, we waited for 6 hours. We were told the helicopter's down. We didn't know anything. And then 6 hours later, 2 men from Dara's company came up the driveway to her house. We'd all gathered at the house, of course, family and friends, just waiting. And so surreal, her little child sleeping upstairs. And there was a body. We'd heard on the radio that there was a body had been recovered from the water, but we didn't know who it was. And these 2 men from her company came to say that the body recovered was Dara. So the search and rescue helicopter, Rescue 118, had gone searching the area, found the debris of the helicopter, and they saw Dara was a redhead, and they saw her body in the water and just her red hair out in the water. And they tried to get down to get her, but the seas that night, the conditions that night, the weather that night were horrific, and they couldn't get to her. They couldn't reach her. So they called in the Achill Island lifeboat, the RNLI lifeboat. And they went in and they collected Dara from the water and wrapped her in blankets and minded her, and then brought her back to Mayo the next morning. So that's, for me, was my introduction with grief. And it has been like a bomb going off in my life, in our lives. And my 2 sisters, within that 6 hours between the time of the phone call and the time that we heard that Dara died, my 2 sisters and I became guardians. So none of us were mothers, and we became guardians of our child overnight. And we love him so much. Your heart bursts with love for this child. But what I meant about the secondary losses is it's really difficult. It's really difficult with your own life, and the path of your own life and how your own life would have been is completely changed because you have this 20 plus year role now. I'll be nearly 70 by the time he's 20, 21, 22. And you have this role in this other path that you're diverted on. So there's so many layers. The podcast isn't long enough to really discuss, all of those things. But that was my introduction to grief. And at the same time, my marriage happened to be coming to an end. We had no children. We'd been on that fertility journey, but had no children. And so I suppose you asked me about how did it lead me to write the book. What I discovered in that first year or two, maybe really grieving Dara, was that the feelings of grief felt familiar. But I hadn't really understood why that was. I had lost people in my life before. Even my parents have a stillborn baby who died on the same date that Dara died, but only 39 years before. But I was 10 at that time. So that didn't impact me in the way Dara's death impacted me. But I noticed that I felt these feelings of grief. They were familiar. And I realized that in that infertility journey, in learning that I wasn't going to become a parent, that I had grieved after that, but I'd never named it as grief because nobody had died. But of course, hope had died. Hope that I would be a parent, hope that I would be part of this world that everybody else, so many other people are. And then you learn that you're not going to be. And then only 3 years after the end of that fertility journey, I found myself a guardian to my sister's child when she has died. And I'm standing in line in a queue somewhere, and I put my hand in my pocket and I take out a little Oatly bar or a little rolled up sock for a 3-year-old. And the head wreck with that, the grief, having made peace with that grief, just opened up those wounds again. And I just thought, gosh, grief in all of this, grief for Dara, grief for not being a parent, grief then for the end of my marriage, all of that, I thought, gosh, this is not what I thought it was as a psychologist, because that's what I am as a professional. That's what I do in my work. But this felt very different than what I thought it would be. And so I thought, well, gosh, if if that's my experience, is it others? And is it worth talking about grief? And so the book is called Tell Me the Truth About Loss, so that we don't sanitize it, we don't get stuck in it, but we tell the truth about what it's like and how you can find hope, I suppose, within that loss and grief journey. That's a bit of a long answer. I'm sorry for that, but that's...
No, definitely don't apologise. Of course not. What do you think it would have been like if you hadn't have had your background in psychology? As in, how much did that help you approach the grief? I mean, as I asked that, then I'm thinking, well, you've just said that it was so different to what you were expecting. So that's an interesting piece, isn't it? That maybe you kind of expected to have some approaches and strategies in like your toolbox to handle this situation, but actually it was so different. So what did you have to do? Did you have to kind of pivot, and did you have to talk to other people in the field? And I don't know, how could it have been different? And how exactly then did you go about handling it based on everything you know about the human mind and behaviour?
There's a lot of questions in there, Sam. I'm going to do my best to get them all. No, that's okay. You just nudge me if I miss some. So I think when I say the grief was so much more different in that initial stages, and even now, that it's so much more different than I expected it to be, from knowing it from a theory perspective, if you like, as a psychologist. What I mean is, it's so much bigger. Grief, when you live it, it's so much bigger. It's so overwhelming. It's that piece around how it impacts every corner of your life. When we grieve, when we're bereaved especially, but I think any loss, for me, you're just not the same person. And I think I never really understood that before from a psychology perspective. I just hadn't got that. I never got it. You're not the same person. And in some ways, I think it's similar to that piece around being a parent. So I'm not a mother, but as I said, I'm a guardian. And we raised Dara's son, the three of us together. And I think when you're a parent, you're a different person. There's this worry piece. There's this other person that you put before you just always. And so you're not the same person. And as a griever, it feels to me exactly the same, in that you're just not the same person. Life is my life before March the 14th, 2017, and my life after it. And so that's what I mean when I say that it was so different, and it's so complex and so bewildering. I think what the psychology has done is it has helped me allow space for my feelings. So I know as a psychologist that we need to accept our feelings, meet them, not judge them. You're smiling, so I can see that resonates with you. You understand that piece. What we often do is with our feelings is we judge them. We judge ourselves for having them. We think, what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling anxious? Or what's wrong with me? Why am I feeling angry or resentful or whatever states we're going through? If we're going through a period of depression or whatever, we can often really judge that. Whereas I think what we need to do instead is we need to look towards that with curiosity, with compassion, with understanding. So I often describe it as, if you get into your car and you turn on the ignition in the car, the lights initially on the dashboard of that car will sort of flash up, but then most of them will go away. But say the fuel tank light stays on. Well, that light isn't either right or wrong or good or bad. We don't judge it. It's just a little thing to indicate to us what needs our attention within that car. Our emotions and our emotional states and the state of our mental health and all of those things are like lights on the dashboard of the car. If we can say, what's that telling me needs attention in my life? What do I need? Do I need rest? Do I need support? Do I need to be heard? Do I need to express? What do I need? So I suppose the psychology piece has helped me to understand that whatever I felt was okay. So, we had 5 years of investigations and inquests into the crash of Rescue 116, and all done very carefully, sensitively, gently by those, involved. But I attended every day of those. For Dara, I felt she had no voice now, and as her family, we need to do that. So we needed to attend, and we needed to hear, and we needed to know. She's never going to know what happened. We needed to know. And I found in those inquests that sometimes I was so angry. I was so angry. I don't sit in that anger, but sometimes I still am so angry about it because this was entirely preventable. Such a loss, such a waste and loss of life. And so psychology teaches me that it's okay to feel that. Why would I not? Dara's my friend. We, as a family, we're very close. And we were all friends. And so she's my friend as well as my sister. I know her voice like I know my voice. I know her face like I know my face. We spent our childhood, we were only 3 years apart. So myself and my twin sister were born first, and then Dara 3 years later. And so we spent our childhood together, and then our other siblings followed on after that. So, it's the squabbles in the car and the way to school or around the breakfast table. It's the teenage years. It's the into adulthood. And, Dara and I both had careers where I suppose they were slightly... we would often be working in male orientated environments, and there were different things that were kind of similar in our careers, and we really supported one another and all of those kind of things. So of course I'm angry that she dies at 45, that her child is left without parents, that all the years she should have had with my parents are lost. And I think psychology helped me understand that whatever you feel, lean into it, allow it, don't block it, don't numb it. Do what you can in that space to allow it. That is, I would say, how psychology helped me. And yes, I did reach out to psychs. All I can say about how Dara died was that it was traumatic, utterly traumatic for us to know, that she was found after the crash on her own in these seas, these wild, huge, wild seas off the west coast of Ireland. And she was just there in the water. The helicopter, when it ditched, she managed to get her seatbelt off. We think she may have taken some oxygen, we don't know. She got her helmet off, and she got herself out of the little side window of the helicopter. They do a thing called the dunker where they train them how to do this. And Dara had done her dunker training just 10 days before. And she managed to get herself out. The helicopter had gone down so many meters into the water. And she managed to get herself out with the aim of getting back to her family. But she didn't survive the journey up to the top of the sea. And so it was traumatic. For a long time, we didn't know, was she alive then? We didn't know till the inquest. And so for me, I needed to talk to somebody about that. And psychology told me that was okay to do that. And it told me that those flashbacks and the nightmares and all of those things that I experienced, they're entirely normal. There's your system's way of saying the shock and the fright and the trauma of this is impacting. So again, possibly a bit of a long answer, but that's really how psychology, I think, has played a part for me. It doesn't shield you from any of the pain, but it really helped me understand the pain and allow space for the pain, which is what we need to do in processing it. And that's probably the gift that I got from my profession when trauma and tragedy has hit my personal life.
It's so hard though, isn't it? At the time when I know this stuff about acceptance and recognizing that a thought is a thought and sitting with an emotion and thinking this is a signal for something. But it's so hard when it hits you and it feels like it's not going to go away anytime soon. It's almost like it can hit you in an evening and it's like, right, this evening's a write-off. I know that I'm not going to feel better until the next day. This feeling of guilt or anger or shame is here and it's not going anywhere for the next few hours. And I find that so difficult because it's like I just can't do anything and I want to just do something. I want to just move or take some anger out or something to just get rid of it there and then. I think there's also like, do you think there's a side of people though as well where that kind of feeling, it's also... it makes you feel a bit alive. And there's something about it that's, I don't know if addictive is the right word, but it's like, I don't know if I'm explaining it well, and it's something that you've seen in people that you've worked with or yourself, where it's like, okay, but it makes me feel like pumped up and I can feel the adrenaline going around. So it's like there's two sides to this. So what am I asking? What's the question? Well, just the fact that it's so difficult, that when we're sitting with that feeling, we want to get out of it so badly, even though we know, okay, I just need to accept it and kind of let it do its thing. But we're so desperate to move through it, aren't we? And get rid of it as quickly as we can.
Yeah, and I think that's a really human response. A really human response to do that. Our natural instinct is to move towards pleasure and away from pain. So when we experience some of these emotions or these emotional states, they're intensely painful. Sometimes people talk about positive and negative emotions. I personally don't do that. Emotions are just emotions, or experiences are just experiences. But some are more unpleasant. Some are what I would call the ugly emotions. They're harder for us to feel, and we can tend to really want to move away from those. So I think the starting place is understanding my instinct to move away from this, to want to move away from this, is an entirely normal instinct. And I think that beginning place of allowing yourself that and saying that to yourself, I notice I feel like I want to move away from this now. That'd be a great thing to do. Or I notice that part of me that feels the need to run from discomfort is yelling at me right now. You could do that the next time. Anybody can do that. That's a really good thing to do. It's also important to say that actually sometimes it is okay, and lots of times it's okay to get up, to get out, to get on, to move. So I don't think they have to be mutually exclusive, in that I think you can accept your feelings and you can process your feelings and you can sit with your feelings, but you could actually do that while you're moving, for example. So nature, so we know with grief and grieving, nature is an amazing place there. And a lot of people who are bereaved will move to nature, and you see people sea swimming or hiking or walking, or pets are the same thing, walking their dog. And you'll often hear that in talking to people who are grievers. So it's understanding I can be in that space and allow myself to feel those feelings and allow myself to notice that I want to run away from those feelings, but also keep moving. And I think the moving part is really important. One mistake I absolutely made, and I really didn't know this at the time, and I would do things so differently, is I really did not understand at the time how physical grief was and how it impacts us physically. And you mentioned what you were talking about earlier there with, how it makes you feel alive. There's such a surge and surges of adrenaline when we're going through anything like this. And so for me, actually, the physical impact of shock and trauma and grief, actually, I find still ongoing. And so if I now was to talk to me back then in 2017, so what I would say to me then is what I've just said to you now, which is move, because I didn't. I suppose I was dealing with, we'd all the admin around Dara's grief. We were minding this child who'd literally lost his mother overnight. She'd kissed him goodnight that night, and he just never saw her again. So we were dealing with all of that. We were dealing with all, it was a really public thing. And I don't think that had to be a bad thing, but we were dealing with all of that. I was dealing with this marriage ending at the same time. I'm self-employed, I was trying to run a business and manage and help all my clients. We had all the investigations and the inquests. A lot of them happened actually through the pandemic years. So in the pandemic, at some point, different points, I was juggling the, COVID-19 pandemic and all the changes that made to all of our lives with that, running a practice, going through a divorce with my sisters raising a child, and all of those things. And I think the investigations were huge. I finished writing my book in, it was published 2020, just before the pandemic. I sort of finished writing it. But actually, what was to come in those years after the pandemic around the investigations and the inquest and the daily hearing of those details of the crash again and again, the impact on me was just immense. And so physically, it has impacted my immune system. I ended up with pneumonia. I was hospitalized with it. My hair began to fall out. I keep getting colds and flus. I'm on antibiotics. I'm on steroids all the time. My whole system is just, I would say, burnt out, run down. And I think what happened was there was just so much stuff I was dealing with. And I was dealing with it emotionally, absolutely dealing with it emotionally, both myself and with professional help. But I think I was so exhausted by it all that the one thing I didn't do was keep moving. And I think that has not helped my physical health now. So I have a body of work to do around helping myself come back to myself. And that's really around rest, recharge, nature, movement. And I think all of that would be a great help to somebody in that space when you have all those feelings, is to say, feel them emotionally, see them, notice them, describe them. Where do you feel them in your body? Do they move? What triggers them? What settles them? Do you know where those feelings come from? Do you understand why they're there? Can you allow yourself feel them? So you can do all that work, all that great work. Just pop in a bit of nature too. Pop in a bit of movement too. You'll learn from my mistake and do better, I think.
And is there anything else in terms of, grief is different for everyone, isn't it? And the strategies or approaches that might have helped you or someone else going through the grieving process will be different to other people. But is there anything else that you kind of recommend, suggest that people do? And I don't know if this is a bit of just like an overly practical way of looking at things, where I'm just like, my brain is like, what can I just put on my notepad and tick off every day if someone is going through this process? And of course, it doesn't work like that. But I don't know, is there anything else that you suggest to people to move through this period, aside from nature, exercise, the stuff we talked about in terms of accepting and sitting with feelings as well?
Yeah, so that nature piece, the exercise piece, allowing that you're going to feel your feelings through your body as well as through your emotions. That's definitely one. But also, I would say, make an appointment with your grief. So to actually have a space or a place or a time, whether it's on a daily basis, whether it's on a weekly basis, whether it's on a monthly basis, that you say, this is my space, that whatever I feel in that grieving space, I'm going to give it a place to be. And it's not saying that won't come in some other times, but it's saying it has its own space and it's allowed. And make an appointment with your grief, I think, is a really important, excellent thing to do. Also, we're all very different. So some people will be more independent than others and feel like I must do it myself. But I would say to somebody gently, if you have even a smidgen of an inkling to take some of the support offered to you, if there is some offered to you or around you, take that. If somebody can't, remember I said earlier about that I feel like we're thrown this bag of rocks and we're told, you got to carry that bag of rocks. Now, this is your pain for the person you love, and you have to carry that bag of rocks. And I said, no one else can carry the bag of rocks for you. So that's true. But they can run alongside you and they can say to you, come on, just 2 more steps and we'll take a breather. They can hand you the water bottle or spray it in your face to cool you down. They can hand you the little snack, the protein snack or whatever to keep you going. So I think that support piece, I would say lean into the support. And if you find you don't have support, the grieving community is an incredible community. it feels to me as if people on that in that community, they sort of want to hand back the line to others. Things that they've learned or discovered along the way. It's a really generous, warm-spirited, big-hearted community. So if you find that you do not have people in your own life to support you, then consider connecting with some of those communities. So maybe your loss is the loss of a child. There are groups there. The loss of a spouse, there are groups there. And I know whether it's in Ireland or the UK, there are some wonderful resources around this. Go find them and connect them. You will find safe spaces where people welcome you. They don't know your exact pain because nobody can, but they know what pain can do to you, so they allow you to feel yours. I notice I would post on Twitter. It's called X now, pardon me. I would post on X. It was Twitter when I started this. And I find I would struggle with things in grief. And when I figured it out myself, I just posted it because I thought, well, if I figure this out, maybe it's going to help someone else. And what I often say to people is, when I post something, okay, if you like my post, that's wonderful, great, I'm happy to help. However, what's more important, go beneath my post and read the posts and the replies of people who have engaged in it. Oh, it's incredible. I might post something and somebody comes along and says, oh gosh, I felt that last week. I'm so glad I'm not losing my mind. Somebody else says, oh, I'm the same. And then somebody will come in and go, my dad died this morning. And then everybody just comes in around them and just provides the support. These are strangers, but they're not strangers because they're a community who understands. So even if you're in that space where you need to go and look and find it, I will say to you that I think as a community, the grieving community will look after you.
And that's invaluable, isn't it? The connection with people around us. By far my most interacted tweet that I've put out, and I've put it out several times now because it seems to resonate so much, is something around loneliness and me sharing a bit of backstory of myself, and then I say these are the 10 steps that I try and take when I'm feeling lonely. And yeah, it resonates every single time with people, and I can get thousands of likes and hundreds of comments. And like you say, all the comments saying, thank you so much. Like, I thought I was the only one feeling like this, and all right, I'm going to try this. And then the people that start interacting and supporting each other, it's just brilliant, isn't it? It's fantastic. There is a little part of me though that worries that some people outsource their community and connection to only social media and the internet. What do you think about that? Like, I'm worried that when people start saying my DMs are always open and like, I get it, like that's really nice, isn't it? But at the same time, I'm thinking that surely that can't replace the touch of someone and the looking someone in the eye and communicating. So is it that it's kind of a supplementary thing, and I've gained a lot of comfort and support from it, but at the same time, I know that my first port of call is my sisters and my brother and my friends. Those are the people I'm going to share things first with, because I know just how important that face-to-face and the big hug is to me. What's your point of view on that?
Completely agree.
Right. Okay.
Completely agree. When you post that post that you've reshared, or any of those posts, what you're doing essentially is you are giving other people, they don't need to get it from you or I or anybody, but we are inadvertently giving people permission and saying it's okay. It's okay to talk about grieving. It's okay to talk about loneliness. So that's what you do in that post, and that's wonderful. The bit around the in real life stuff, you used the word supplementary. As you were speaking, in my head, the expression was in addition to. It's exactly that. So it's about the life that we live, the world that we live in is our real world life with your sisters and brother and your friends around you. So that's exactly the space to go, to live that life in, not to live it in an online life. And I think even though social media has a bad rap sometimes and it can be an utter hellhole in places, it can also be supportive and be helpful for people. So for some people, they will get that comfort and they're able to maybe say things online that they wouldn't want to say to people in their own lives, or perhaps they say it online first. And then they feel they can say it in their own lives. And both are okay, but I think the word here is balance. And the balance comes in exactly what you said. It's about that online is a supplementary word or supplementary place to our real life. And I know certainly I come offline at different times when it's too much. I'm probably, as I said, it's been an utterly grueling, relentlessly grueling 7 years. And I would probably feel quite burnt out and need a bit of space. And so I find the thing that goes with me is the headspace for the online presence. I just come right into my own world, my real world, with my people around me. And I think that's really good for us. So it's an addition to rather than instead of, should be that online word, would be my feeling exactly like yours.
Yeah. And I think that you talked about making an appointment with your grief, and I think we should be making appointments with social media as well, not letting it encroach on our whole lives throughout the day. You know, recently I've deleted the Twitter app and the Facebook app off my phone so that I just check it on my desktop every so often, and like that's enough. I'm not constantly like looking at that as my source of connection all the time. Like, no, I want to be looking up at the sky and looking people in the eye rather than just be staring at my phone the entire time. What about people that are supporting someone else who is grieving? We've talked a lot about, if this is what you're going through, strategies and approaches and the community that you might move towards and what you can do for yourself. But what if there's someone who is wanting to be that source of comfort and support for someone else who is going through a loss?
And that's a really tricky space to be.
Yeah.
Because people often, they don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And even if it's somebody who's, if you're bereaved, if you're grieving yourself, sometimes you still sometimes aren't sure what to say. Because really often there aren't words, So I think the first thing to say is that it's all right to say to somebody something as simple as, I'm so sorry for your loss. Now, interestingly, I actually did say that to somebody online only the other day. They came in response to a post that I had posted. And within their response, within maybe their second response, they said something about somebody who had died or something like that. And I just said, I'm so sorry for your loss. And they just came back with one word, which was platitude. So, yeah. So straight away, there was this, I don't like you saying this to me, as in this is what they were thinking. They just put that word platitude out. I absolutely, from the heart, I don't know this person, but from the heart, when I said...
What does platitude mean?
Oh, it just means, that's just a kind of a twee phrase, a sort of, a phrase you just threw out, I'm so sorry for your loss. But
oh, wow.
I feel people should look at, this is a slight tangent, but I feel... So you're going to have to remind me the original question now because I'm going to forget that. That's what a 55-year-old woman's brain is. But anyway, so I feel that we should... What was the question? You have to remind me that initial question.
The initial question was, how can we support other people who are grieving?
Yes. So we need to allow that. Sometimes you will try to support them with that intent of, I'm so sorry for your loss. And there will be some people in real life or online who actually won't accept that, who don't want that, who aren't ready to receive that. That's okay. Leave them. So for me, with that person, I didn't get into any over and back with them. I just left that. I just leave that off. So you don't have to have something, really new or really profound to say. If you, with your heart, actually just express those condolences, I think that's a start. Then, depending on who the person is in your life and where they are in your life, you can look and see what are the other ways I can support them. So, for example, for some people, if you think of a line sort of over here, a continuum, we have intuitive grievers and we have instrumental grievers. And intuitive grievers are where it's really around the feeling the feelings of loss. And instrumental grievers would be around the doing pieces. And then, of course, in the middle, we've got most of us, which is blended or a piece of both. So one of the things when you're looking to help somebody, support somebody who's bereaved or grieving a loss in their life, is to tune in and think, what do I know about this person? Are they a feeling person? Are they somebody who's more likely to find it helpful if I call around, if I say to them, let's go for a walk, if I, listen to them, if I try and help them talk if they want to talk, or listen, be there and ready to listen if they want to talk. And of course, that's the key with when you're supporting somebody is don't be afraid to mention the person's name. Be very clear. Sometimes people will say to me, I don't want to talk about Dara because I don't want to upset you. A, the person's already upset. B, they will never forget the person that we love who has died. And C, most importantly, you're doing us a favor when you mention them. The people we love who have died are often some of our favorite people to talk about. So you give a real gift when you do that. So you might think about, is my person that I'm supporting somebody who might be more in that space? Are they, for instance, maybe somebody over this other end of that continuum? Maybe it's somebody who could do with me walking their dog, putting lasagna in their freezer. Those practical elements. I know that you're, chairperson of this thing. Would it be helpful if I took that off you for this year and just give you a bit of space? So I think tune into your person, see what you know about them and what you can sort of figure out from that. And there's a lovely little expression that sort of finishes this up nicely, which is that, and I don't know who, it's anonymous, it's accredited to C.S. Lewis, I think sometimes, but I believe it's not from them. And it's that when you cannot look on the bright side, I will sit with you in the dark. So if you're supporting somebody who's grieving, if you can think about knowing what I know about them, what's the way for me to sit in the dark with them? Is that a practical way or set of ways? When Dara died, one lovely, lovely, lovely friend of mine, our dad had gone to Cheltenham for the races. He was over in the UK and he had to be rushed back. And one of my friends rang me and said, if you want to get him on a plane, I will go to the UK and I will bring his car back. That's supporting somebody who's grieving. Okay, so tune into your person, see what might be suitable, realize you don't have to know it all. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to fix it because you can't. And then just be there in whatever ways are appropriate for your relationship.
Yeah. Just sitting with someone and holding their hand and just saying, I'll sit with you for as long as you like. There's this clip that was doing the rounds on the internet recently of, two men talking. So we have a podcaster, Theo Von. I think he's also a comedian as well, I'm not sure, and talking to an MMA fighter, Sean Strickland. And they were having a conversation. They were talking about the Sean Strickland's upbringing, his childhood and the trauma that he went through. And all of a sudden he just completely choked up, and you could see that it completely took him by surprise, and he didn't know what to do with himself at all. And the podcast host kind of initially tried to move the conversation on, but then he realized that his guest didn't want to do it. And he just said, you can see this clip where he just said, I'm sorry, buddy, I'll just sit with you for as long as you like. So the cameras are on them, they're recording, but the host was just like, I'm really sorry. We can just sit here. It's absolutely fine. And then, I don't know how long, 10, 20, 30 seconds passes. And then he starts talking more about how the trauma affected him and how it still comes up now and is affecting him now.
So beautiful.
I mean, so beautiful and so powerful to watch these two grown men. One of them beats people up for a living, but he was completely open with his emotions. But then the reaction of the host to just say, I'm going to sit with you for as long as you want, buddy. It's absolutely fine. It's like, wow, that's kind of how it's done.
Absolutely. That was beautiful. That was brave. Because what we tend to do, what we want to do, if you think about it, if a child is upset, what do we want to do? We want to scoop them up and we want to fix it. And they're there, stop crying, don't cry. There's that sense of we don't want people to be upset. But actually, we need sometimes to be upset. We need to be angry. We need to be feeling all of those feelings, which can be, as I said, those ugly feelings or uncomfortable feelings. And so when you allow somebody that space, which is as a psychologist or if somebody's a psychotherapist, that's what we do in that work. You allow that space for somebody, you create that space, and you say, you can feel whatever you feel in this space. And you help them learn how to feel that in the rest of their life. So what that host did there was, they literally created that space and they said, this is okay. There is no need to keep talking. There is no need to push your body through the lump in your throat or the pain in your chest or whatever it is from the pain and trauma that you're feeling. This is you and me right here, right now, and you can feel this. What a gift.
Well, Niamh, I can't put into words just how much I appreciate you coming onto the show and being so open and vulnerable, but being so generous with the advice that you were offering and the insights and the tips and everything like that. Like, this is the type of conversation that I wanted this podcast to be about. And of course, it can't happen without guests like you that come on, share their story, share their expertise in such an open way. So I really appreciate you for taking the time to talk to me today.
You're very welcome. And I get a lot of requests to do a lot of things, and I obviously check them all out before I say yes. And I love the idea of this podcast. And I have, that idea of insight and that idea of just, let's give somebody a bit of a peek into somebody else's world or something that we all experience or whatever. That is just such a useful thing for us. And I think we're in a world where there's so much information, but this insight piece has information, I think, packaged up or boxed up in a way that's not pressure inducing, that's meaningful, that's relevant, that's relatable. And I just loved it. So thank you for inviting me on. I'm really glad to speak to you today.
Thank you. 3 questions, quick fire questions that we finish with every guest. The first one is, what's one lesson you wish you'd have been taught when you were a child?
That I'm allowed to have needs. You said quick fire. Do you want me to expand on that?
I did say quick fire. And I was debating whether to push you a little bit further and just maybe expand on that a little. But you don't have to. We can move on to the next one.
That's okay. I'll just give you a little. I suppose what I mean by that is, I think that a lot of us, maybe all of us, don't realize that we can have needs. Certainly as women, I can't really say anything else. I do know for women, we find it hard. We find it tough to realize that if you have a need, it's okay, it's valid, you're allowed to have it. There's an expression that says, taking care of yourself is not me first, it's me too. And I wish I'd learned that earlier in life. And I think I probably, even in this grieving piece, that was my point, even about me physically. I think I looked after my sister's reputation. I've looked after, alongside my sisters, I've looked after her child. I've looked after my clients. But I probably put me in that space on the bottom of the list. And so, that I'm allowed to have needs. I'd have figured that out. If I'd have figured that out as a 5-year-old, would have been nice.
What about a habit that maybe you've introduced into your life recently that's helping you feel better, helping you feel happier and healthier? Nature.
100%. Nature, see, the blue spaces. And it's ironic, I suppose, given that Dara died at sea, but there's something that feels so at peace when I'm at the sea and I can just look out on the sea. I don't know, I feel connected to her, but I just feel connected to the earth. Green spaces too, obviously, but I would be drawn to the sea. So, and I probably, with COVID and with lockdowns, I got completely out of that habit. So just moving out of my head, moving out into the world. And a habit I would say to anybody is that one around make an appointment with your grief, make an appointment with your mental health. But if you can do that with a space for yourself each day and each week that would be outdoors in nature with some gentle movement. If you wrap that up all in a little package, you have done yourself the world of good, so much good in that.
And last one, if you could give everyone in the world one book, which book would you give them?
It's a book that's up on my shelf there. There are so many books. As I said, I'm not a parent. I am a guardian. I'm not a parent. But this question to me is a bit like saying to a parent of, 4 children, which is your favorite child?
What's your favorite?
Yeah, I just think, oh, don't make me pick. And I'm somebody who goes into bookshops and I open books and I smell them. I love books. So I found this question really hard. And I think you could go loads of places. So I think of The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. I think, you can go books like that. But I think for some people, that book just would back away from that. So a book, if I was to give everybody one book, the book I think I would pick would be the Charlie Maxey book, whose name has just gone straight out of my head and I can't see it behind me on the shelf. The Boy, the Horse.
Something, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
The Boy, the Horse and the Mole, I think it is. And please, Charlie Maxey, forgive me for getting that name wrong, if it is wrong. But it's that book. And why I would suggest this book is because it's such small bite-sized pieces that actually have some really good stuff beneath them. So even that piece about when we're, I can't see where I'm going, I can't see what I'm doing. And the answer is, well, can you see the step just in front of you? Yes. Well, then take that step. That's really, if we peel that back, there's a lot of stuff in there about being present. There's a lot of stuff in there about being mindful. So I think it's a book that you might look at it and think, oh, well, that's a book that a psychologist would suggest. But I actually think there's a lot of psychology within some of the drawings and the words that are in it. So it's a lovely book that's an easy read, but yet could be quite profound for people. That's the one that I would pick. And huge apologies for not actually having the name of that on the tip of my tongue.
Don't worry. And of course, talking about books, your own book, Tell Me the Truth About Loss. Where can people get a copy of that?
Yeah, so it's published by Gill Books here in Ireland, but it's available worldwide. It's available on Kindle. It's available on any good bookshops. Tell Me the Truth About Loss. And it's a psychologist's personal journey of loss, grief, and finding hope. And it's on audiobook as well. And I get, even this week, I've even had messages in, people saying, my loss was very different to your loss. My introduction to grief was very different than your introduction to grief. I wasn't sure if your book was going to help. I wasn't sure if it was going to be relevant. And people say, my child died by suicide last year and I understand more about my feelings now. Or my mum died and we never talked about it. And now my dad, who has read your book, is beginning to speak about it. So the heartwarming feeling when you get those emails is incredible. And the book was published in 2020 and I'm still getting those emails. I said even this week there was some in. So if anybody reads it, I hope they enjoy it. And I think what people will see is I wrote it, it's quite raw at the beginning. I can see even the language and how I used really the descriptions, but you can see as I get towards the end of the book, you can almost see that shape of grief. You can see the different language I'm using. There's a different feeling to the last chapters. If somebody says to me, I want to read your book, but I'm not able or I'm not ready, I say, go to the last 2 chapters and just read them. And they'll maybe give you that pinpoint of light and that pinpoint of hope that you can say, whatever my own loss is, I can find my way through it. But they might do it, without you having to read some of the other stuff. And the other stuff is great. And I've done it gently and sensitively, but I have been straight about it. But it is interesting that I can actually feel and hear myself the difference in the language and the words used towards the end. And I think that's an indication of that movement of grief.
Thank you again, Niamh, so much for your time today.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Thank you for tuning in. I really hope you found my conversation with Niamh insightful. If you did find the episode helpful, then please share it with friends, family and colleagues who you think would find it useful too. You can also support this podcast by following and rating the show on whichever app you're listening on. Thank you again, and I look forward to bringing you another episode soon.